To solve for an angle in a right triangle, we will be using SOHCAHTOA. And to start, we will use the angle that we want to find, so theta in this case, as our reference angle. So we will label opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse. The hypotenuse, like always, is the longest side across from the 90 degree. Opposite the angle I want is AB, leaving 12 as my adjacent. Now, I need to pick my ratio from SOHCAHTOA. My angle is already the unknown measurement, so my side lengths have to be given. So when I look at my triangle, I don't know anything about opposite. So if I use opposite, that will be two unknowns, my angle and the side. But I do know the adjacent side and the hypotenuse. So adjacent and hypotenuse, AH, should make you think of cos. So I'm going to set up my ratio. I don't know the angle, so I'm going to write cos theta equals, my adjacent is 12 and my hypotenuse is 16. Now we need to figure out the angle that makes this ratio work. And the way we do that is by going to our calculator and taking the inverse function of 12 over 16. So this is what I want you to write. Cos inverse, so it looks like it's cos to the power of -1, but that's the notation for inverse of our fraction 12 over 16. So if you look at your calculator, usually you'll have to use your shift or your second function button, and you'll do shift cos, and then it should pop up that cos inverse notation, and then you just type in your fraction, 12 divided by 16. And make sure you have brackets around that fraction. You click enter, and hopefully you get approximately 41 degrees. If you haven't already tried that in your calculator, try it now to make sure that you know how to use it properly. Also, make sure your calculator is in degree mode. All right, let's try our next one. So in triangle DEF, I'm looking for angle D, which is labeled theta. So let's go ahead and label our triangle. 13 is the hypotenuse, 8 is opposite, and the blank side is adjacent. And I will not be using that adjacent. Instead, I have opposite and hypotenuse. So OH should make you think of so, which means it's the sine function. So sine theta equals opposite, which is 8, over hypotenuse, which is 13. And if letters weren't there, like the theta symbol wasn't there, you could have written sine D equals 8 over 13 and solved for angle D that way. And now, anytime you're looking for an angle, you're just going to use the inverse. So sine inverse of 8 over 13. And when you do that, you should get approximately 38 degrees. Now, if you mess up on your ratio and you accidentally put 13 over 8 and you try to take the sine inverse of that fraction, you will get an error. In the trig ratios video, I said that for sine and cos, your ratio can never be greater than 1 because the hypotenuse is always in the denominator. So if you get an error, that will be the reason why you messed up on the order of your numbers. So keep that in mind. All right, let's go to the next one. I want you to label your triangle using theta as your reference angle and pick your ratio. And then take the inverse of that ratio and find your angle. Then come back to check your answer with me. All right, so opposite is 25, adjacent is 21, the blank side is the hypotenuse. So we're given opposite and adjacent, so I hope you chose tan as your ratio. So tan theta equals 25 over 21. If you went the other way around and wrote 21 over 25, that would be wrong because it is not adjacent over opposite. And now you will take the tan inverse of your fraction. And for tan, it's okay if the fraction is greater than 1 because there's no limitations on opposite and adjacent. Neither one has to be greater than the other. And now when you take your tan inverse, hopefully you got approximately 50 degrees. And for angles, I usually want it to the nearest whole number unless I state otherwise. All right, let's try the last one. So in triangle PQR, I want you to solve for theta. So pause the video, label your triangle, pick your ratio and set it up, then solve for theta, then come back to check your work. All right, so hopefully you chose the cos ratio because you were given the adjacent side and the hypotenuse. And when you take the cos inverse of 7/10, you should get approximately 46 degrees. So to recap, when you're solving for an angle, label your triangle using your unknown angle as your reference. Pick the two sides that are given, and then once you have your ratio set up, take the inverse ratio or the inverse trig function to get your angle.